Everybody to Own the Real. I'm your host, Pastor Adam McCain, and what a great, beautiful day in wonderful North Texas. Coming to you from Dallas on the campus of Christ for the Nations, the greatest Bible school in the whole world. At least that's what they tell me to say. No, it's true. We're the greatest, and happy to be a part. You're going to love my guest here today. It's going to revolutionize the way you think, I hope. I pray that as you listen today and you learn and are motivated to learn more. My special guest today is Dr. David Barton, and he is he's the founder of WallBuilders. He's also a historian, and one of my go-tos he's a hero in the faith to me, and one of my go-tos for anything historical, especially with as much deception as we have out. Dr. Barton, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me.
You know, I asked if we could do this, and you said yes. So just a quick, if you don't know Dr. David Barton and you look him up and you get to Wikipedia, here's what Wikipedia is going to say. Barton's work is devoted to advancing the discredited idea that the United States was founded as an explicitly Christian nation and rejecting the notion that the United States Constitution calls for separation of church and state. They also use the term here that you are a pseudo-historian. I don't even know what any of that means.
They don't either.
Yeah. How did you get on Wikipedia's bad side? What did you do?
It really was because they are threatened by the message, because in our case, and this is the funny part about pseudo-historian, we own the largest collection of privately owned original documents in America.
Hey, qualify that for the largest.
About 160,000 original documents and about 120,000 from before 1812 or 1820. So all we have documents from every founding father, every signer of the Constitution, every signer of the Declaration.
Things that they wrote.
Things that they
Bibles
wrote,
that
things that they
read.
owned. We have George Washington's eyeglasses. We have George Washington's compass. We have two world-class museums here in the Fort Worth, Dallas area where you can come see all this. We have the Bible that landed on the moon with Apollo 14. We have the Chalice Cup signed by Buzz Aldrin when he took communion on the moon, getting off on Apollo 11. People don't know that. See, that's why they call it a pseudo-historian, because I bring out stuff they don't know, and if they don't know it, then it's got to be wrong.
It's got to be wrong.
And so instead of looking at truth and they say, well, actually, I'm holding right here the Bible that landed on the moon. And Apollo 14, they took 100 Bibles to the moon. They built an altar on the moon. They left a Bible on the moon, and they brought 99 back. We own 3 of the 99 they brought back. And no. We never had a Bible on the moon. Well, I'm holding one right here.
Yeah.
And this goes back to Ed White, Apollo 1, who was a Christian who was burned to death in an explosion in Apollo 1. And the other astronauts said, hey, Ed always wanted to get Bibles on the moon. We're going to get Bibles on the moon. Because of that explosion with Apollo 1, they created what's called the Apollo Prayer League. They said, this is really dangerous stuff. And so every mission had employees praying and fasting.
Really?
Yeah, every single mission. And so actually when you get to Apollo 8, that's when Apollo 8 was the first trip to the moon, to go around the moon, get ready to land on the moon. And Borman and Anders and those guys, they read Genesis 1 in space on Christmas Eve. That resulted in lawsuits. And then when Apollo 11 went back and Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong were the first guys to get off, Buzz said, man, this is really significant. We need to dedicate this to Christ. And so at the time they landed on the moon, right after they landed, he, in concert with his church back in Houston, had communion together. And so he has communion there because that's significant before he gets up. I mean, whoever knew we had Christian astronauts and who knew any of this was going on?
No.
But see, that's what we own the originals to, and because they've never heard it before, that makes us pseudo-historian. But the other thing is it scares them, because when you start showing God in the space program, well, I thought everything's supposed to be secular. You keep religion in church. No, you get God in education, get God in the military. We have history on all of that and how it was really shaped by Christians. And so it was kind of funny. What they're doing Wikipedia, they started decades ago. I remember back, I got a call from
we're old enough to remember when Wikipedia became something.
Oh, yeah, that's right, before it was. That's right.
Yeah.
I got a call from U.S. News and World Report, and they said, hey, now think of this in terms of 3 decades ago and what money meant back then. They said, the ACLU just spent $1 million to discredit you. What do you think? Well, $1 million back then was a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And it really hurt the ACLU because they're so secularist that I'm saying God needs to be involved in everything. And this is the way it has been in America. This is the way it needs to be in America. God didn't put us here just to be spectators. He put us here to be participants. We need to be involved in every arena. And so at that time, they started spending a lot of money. And so now it's in the tens of millions. It's just,
Really?
yeah, they actually changed logarithms on all the search functions so that I don't come up. And if I do, it's all the negative stuff that comes up.
Really?
Yeah. They put a lot of money into it because this is a scary message for them. If America becomes less than secularist, then they can't move it in the direction they want to. And so if we get back to God, they're so God haters. And actually, it's interesting. We actually went to court and won defamation suits over these kind of claims. And Wikipedia won't even let us put the defamations. Oh, no, that's biased. What do you mean it's biased? We went to court and got a judgment, and you guys won't even post the judgment. So they have the pseudo-historian stuff without any footnotes. But what we actually have in law and history, they won't put up. And so as it is now, it's so bad that when President Obama came in, when President Biden came in, I was put on the domestic terrorism watch list.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not allowed.
Domestic terrorists.
I've spoken at military bases for years. The military used to send me across the world to speak at their bases, and because I do so much military history, I can take all the guys. I don't care what branch you're in. I'll show you all the heroes. Patton. Nobody knows about Patton's prayer at the Battle of the Bulge. How God answered a prayer miraculously, gave 6 days of weather. The weather instantly changed. We have the weather reports and after action that talked about how God and the weather guys, meteorologist, says this is a miracle. This is not what the forecast shows. We got clear sky. Well, that's how he won Battle of the Bulge. He was very open about that. Went to church and thank God for it. He actually had been a Sunday school teacher with young people. Nobody ever knows that about Patton.
No.
Or you go to MacArthur, and MacArthur, when he rebuilds Japan, he says, if you want me to rebuild Japan, send me 5,000 missionaries and send me all the Bibles you can. And so for several years in Japan, the Bible was the best-selling book in Japan after World War II.
Wow.
But nobody knows that about MacArthur. So I would go through and just do history and show, look, a soldier being a man of faith is a common thing.
Yeah.
George Washington and all through. And so now I can't even go on the military bases to show military history anymore or do meetings with chaplains when Democrats are in office. I scare them.
Yeah.
Of course, when Republicans are in, it's fine for me to travel those places. But
Sure.
it's just they've spent tens of millions.
To take God out of our history.
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. And that's where we are today, quite frankly. You and I were talking kind of off air, but come to Black History Month. One of the things that really disturbs me now with Black History Month is the fact that when you look at Black History Month posters, it's all 20th century guys. It's MLK, which is great. It's Rosa Parks, which is great. It's all these great guys. But how come you don't have all the black heroes out of the 1600s or the 1700s or the 1800s? I mean, why don't you have Matthias de Souza? He was the first black man elected to office in America in 1641. And by the way, why don't you have Wentworth Cheswell? Because he's a founding father, black founding father, elected in 1768. He was reelected for the next 49 years, held 8 different political positions. He's a black man of the founding era. He did Paul Revere-like ride. He started the public school system in New Hampshire. He started the library system in New Hampshire, and nobody knows him. And so by the time you get to 1876, there's been more than 1,000 black elected officials in America by 1876. Now, I'm going to put that in context because we're the racist nation. That's what we're told.
Sure.
Great Britain did not elect a black person to office till 1987. Italy did not elect a black person to office till 2010. And we've had 1,000 in office by 1876, and we're the racist nation?
Right.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
So this is the stuff that nobody knows. I mean, if I went through and said, George Washington specifically said that James Armistead, a black double spy, first black double spy in American history, is the reason we won the Revolution. Now, when George Washington says...
back up. So we won the Revolution because of...
Of a double spy, a black double spy named James Armistead.
James Armistead. And
probably the first special forces guy was a black man named Jack Sisson, who was responsible for winning the Battle of Newport in 1778. I mean, I just go through all these other guys. Peter Salem at the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Yeah.
And just go through all these other names, Jordan Freeman and people we never hear anymore. And that's because we had a very racist president who was a historian. In 1902, Woodrow Wilson did a 5-volume history set of the history of the United States. He took every single black person out. There's not a single black. You won't find Fred. Right? You will not find Frederick Douglass. You will not find Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, and they were all alive in his lifetime. And he refused to talk about any black at all. And so this is where academics have gone. They're progressives like Woodrow Wilson was, and so they don't even know our history. And so just talking to any group. I mean, you look at
Talk about
Hispanic.
the Hoosiers, Indiana.
Well, yeah, Harry Hoosier, a great example. Indiana, the Hoosier state, is named after a black evangelist named Harry Hoosier, who preached in the Great Awakenings. And people like Francis Asbury, who's a great preacher in the Great Awakenings, said that Harry had the biggest crowds of all of them.
Yeah.
And so these guys that Harry converted, a lot of them were blue-collar guys that they went west with exploration and helped found Indiana, which is known as the Hoosier State, because his converts went out there and they were largely responsible for help found it. So who today knows that the Hoosier State is named after a black evangelist from the founding era? You know, we don't get that. Or John Morant, he's the first black American to really be a missionary to Native Americans. And he was a black American in the Great Awakenings and part of the American Revolution, etc. We've never
Godly
heard these
men.
names. Godly men, godly guys. No question, godly guys.
I've heard you speak about this before. Dive into this for me. The whole separation of church and state. And which president was that or the one who he's running for election?
Well, let's back up a minute and put context.
Okay.
Before we even talk about the phrase, let's put the context. In 390 A.D., Emperor Theodosius, who was the Roman emperor of the world, Theodosius became a Christian, which great news. Theodosius then made an announcement. He said, I've just become a Christian. He said, you're all going to become Christians or I'm going to kill you. And so that's the first state-established church.
Yep.
And that state-established church, Emperor Theodosius, at that point in time, for the next 1,000 years, government told you what your religion's going to be.
Right.
If you lived in France or Spain, you are going to be Catholic. That's not optional. If you live in Germany, you're going to be a Lutheran. Right. If you live in England, you're going to be an Anglican.
That's right.
And so what happens is in the Reformation, when you start having the Wycliffes and the Tyndalls and the Huss and all these different guys in the Reformation, about 23 major reformers over 7 nations, about 250, 300 years. They're the guys who start saying, guys, if you'll remember when God did the Hebrew Republic, he gave 613 laws, and then he said, Moses, you're over the civil stuff, and Aaron, you're over the temple stuff. God did not let one person run both institutions. He always had institutions separated. And so this is where the reformers start talking about separation of church and state. You can't let the government tell you where you express your religion, where you don't express your religion, and what your faith is. That's not the government's role. Like telling you that you can't pray at schools.
Right.
Like telling you can't have a prayer at football game. That's not the government's role to tell you where you practice your faith.
Right.
So when Thomas Jefferson wrote that phrase in a letter January 1st, 1802, he was responding to a pastor who wrote him. Jeremiah Dodge out of the Danbury Baptist Association wrote him on November the 7th, 1801. And Pastor Dodge said, hey, I'm really concerned because John Adams is now the president, and he's a Congregationalist. And I think they're going to try to establish Congregationalism as a national religion. And Jefferson said, no. We have separation of church and state. They're not going to tell you what you're living. You can be a Baptist in Connecticut and be fine. Yeah. And he was a Baptist. And so that's where the phrase came from, is Jefferson affirms that the government's not going to interfere with your religious practices, public religious practices. And it remained that way, and the Supreme Court actually quoted Jefferson's letter to keep religion in public. 1878, Reynolds versus United States is a case the court quoted and said, hey, separation of church and state means the government can't stop religious expressions. Right. Then you get to 1947, the U.S. Supreme Court, instead of quoting Jefferson's letter, which is 233 words long, it's 3 paragraphs, they quoted a total of 7 words, a wall of separation between church and state. That's all they quoted out of his letter, and they said, this means we can't have any religious activities in public. And so using bad history, not giving context, not providing the 300 years before that, they said, we have to be secular now. And so what happened starting in 62, 63, the court said no more voluntary prayer in schools, no more voluntary Bible reading. We're just not doing religion in public. Following that were 7,300. I've been involved in 11 cases of the U.S. Supreme Court. So there's been 7,300 cases decided about taking religious expressions out of public. And that started after 62.
Say that 70 what?
7,300 cases. The federal courts have ruled that religion has to go out of the public arena. You can't wear a
Christian T-shirt. You can't.
Christian T-shirt. Cross, a cross on a necklace. If you're Russellville, I think it was Russellville, Kentucky. The librarian there had a cross, and they said you can't wear a cross, violates separation of church and state. I'm a librarian. You can't do it because you're a government employee. And so you can't have a Bible study where you can't do any of this stuff. Well, that's now all been changed. The court changed that starting in 2019. In the last 5 years, we've had 4 Supreme Court decisions where the court vacated 7,300 anti-religious decisions. The court no longer holds the position of separation of church and state the way it's been defined. The new standard of the court says if it's a long-standing historical religious tradition, the presumption is constitutionality. So what happened in a 9-0 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court, this is liberals and conservatives in the city of Boston, Shurtleff versus Boston, they said, hey, city of Boston, you have to fly a Christian flag. You cannot, because they had a flagpole that you could fly any flag you wanted on it, and 217 flags were flown there, and a guy came with a Christian flag, and they said, oh, no, we can't fly a Christian flag. U.S. Supreme Court says, yes, you can, and you will. 217 other flags you've done, you're not going to say no to Christianity. So who heard that out of the Supreme Court?
Never.
But see, this is where we are. In the last 5 years, Americans have more religious liberty than they have had in their entire lifetime. We had the governor of Louisiana just sign a law. We were with the governor of Louisiana when he signed the law, and that law says the 10 Commandments are now going back up in every classroom in Louisiana.
That. Yeah.
Then
and
you
then
had
Oklahoma.
Well, that's Louisiana. Then Oklahoma, you have the superintendent of public instruction, Ryan Walters, who said, hey, we're going to put a Bible back in every classroom in the state. He just bought the first 500 Bibles. And why is that not being stopped? Because the court said it's okay again.
Right.
And see, this is what people don't know. Right now, there are 1,200 school districts. There's a total of 200,000 kids that are now going through the Bible as a credit course in high school. They get credit for reading the Bible, and the Bible is the only textbook in the course. And that's public schools.
When's the last time that was?
Exactly. And who's heard about that?
I've not heard.
So what we keep hearing about is separation of church and state. Wait a minute. The court's already said, no, that was a misinterpretation. Separation of church and state means you can't stop religious activity.
I heard you see this years ago, and tell me if you can remember where you were at with this. There was something about someone was either running for president or running for office, and the pastors, the Christians at the time, were like, this guy's not a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he pulled on the separation of church and state, which caused then pastors not to be able
all
to
over.
say. Yeah,
that's called the Johnson Amendment.
Okay.
And what happened was when Lyndon Johnson was running for Senate back in, I think it was 52 or 54, he was running for Senate, and there was what we would today call a 527 group. That's a part of the tax code, but it's a group that attacked him politically, went after him. And so when Lyndon Baines Johnson became a senator, there was an appropriations bill going through the Senate. He added a rider on it that says, look, if you're a nonprofit, you can't talk about political people. And so that at that time just meant that nonprofit. It was not about churches. But a number of years later, some guys said, you know what? Hey, churches are nonprofits. Let's just apply this to churches. And so it's called the Johnson Amendment, and this is where people, they think that I don't have the right of free speech if it's about a political official.
Yeah.
I got news for you. You got a right of free speech because you got a right of free speech, not because Congress gave it to you. That's in the Constitution. The law they passed in 1854 was an undebated rider on an amendment on an appropriations bill. That's not the same level as the Constitution. And so what's happened when Trump came in office his first year in 2017, he ordered the IRS not to enforce the Johnson Amendment because he said it's completely unconstitutional. Now, we've known that. Yeah. Started probably about 10, 11 years ago working with Alliance Defending Freedom. We got pastors to stand up in their pulpit and actually endorse candidates, and we recorded them, and we turned that into the IRS. Said, you got to come after the – we wanted the IRS to try to stop a pastor from saying something. Yeah. We were begging it. And the IRS knew that we were, and they wouldn't ever prosecute any guys because they knew they would lose in court. Yeah. There was no way we would not win that case in court even 10 years ago with a hostile court, because you don't lose the right of free speech just because you're a person of faith. And so a pastor doesn't lose it just because they have a church. I mean – and by the way, let me put it in this perspective. Churches are nonprofit organizations. So is Planned Parenthood.
Right.
Is Planned Parenthood politically active? Do they endorse candidates? And so are unions. Unions are nonprofit. Yeah. Do they get political? So why can't they do it?
We don't think about unions being nonprofits.
See, that's exactly right. They are.
They absolutely are, aren't they?
And
wow.
Nobody's ever going after their tax exemption. But see, you Christians, now you got to shut your little mouth up. And see, this is why Wikipedia tries to portray me as being a pseudo-historian out of the mainstream. No. I am right where the court is. I'm right where history is, and that's why we have all the documents. That's why I'm involved in these legal cases. And so it's Wikipedia and the secular progressives that are so far out of line.
Yeah.
They don't know about history, and actually they do. They just don't care about it.
Talk with the time we have left about the founding fathers and how godly they were, because we have a lot of no, they really weren't. That's all fake.
It's interesting that I speak at a lot of universities, public universities, and I know what's said about founding fathers because I'm very intimately involved in writing history standards for public schools all over the nation.
Okay.
So I know what they're getting taught, and I'll play to that, quite frankly. I'll put up a picture of the signers of the Constitution or the signers of the Declaration and say, hey, tell me who up there you recognize. Tell me what names you can call. And I've never had anybody call 5 names, and there's 250 founding fathers. But the names they do call are Jefferson and Franklin.
Yeah.
Now, that's significant because they're the 2 least religious founding fathers. So how is it you know the 2 least religious guys and you think everybody else is just like them when, take, for example, the 56 signers of the Declaration, 27 of them had Bible school degrees. 27 signers of the Declaration, that's half the signers had Bible school degrees. Half of them. So tell me about this atheist, agnostic, deist. And by the way, let's talk about all the active ministers who signed the Declaration, like John Witherspoon, who's also responsible for First Bible in New Jersey. He did a big family Bible in 1791. Or let's talk about Benjamin Rush of Philadelphia, who actually did a piece in he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
In 1790, he did a piece saying, now that we're all 13 states become one nation rather than 13 nations, we got to make sure the Bible stays in schools. And so he wrote a piece in 1791 giving a dozen reasons we would never take the Bible out of schools. Or how about Francis Hopkins, signer of the Declaration from Pennsylvania, who did the first purely American hymn book. He took the book of Psalms and set them to music so that we could sing the Psalms like David sung the Psalms. Or how about the first mass-produced Bible done by a signer of the Declaration? Or how about the Thompson Bible by a signer of the Declaration? It's the first translation in Greek Septuagint and English. I can go through and show you all the religious guys. So you want to talk to me about Jefferson and Franklin, but you don't know the other 248. And you're telling me that based on the 2 you know, they're all atheist, agnostics, or deists.
And that somehow those 2 had more influence than the rest of them.
And exactly.
As to how we developed.
And it's because we know so low. And same with they were all a bunch of racists and slave owners. Time out. The first abolitionist society started in America was a signer of the Declaration. And by the way, most signers of the Declaration became involved in abolitionist societies in their states. As a British citizen, it was illegal to free your slaves. And so they could not do that. And that's one of the grievances. That's the longest grievance Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, is we've been trying for decades to end the slave trade here, and Great Britain vetoes every attempt to end the slave trade. Jefferson owned, 180 or 200 slaves, somewhere in there. And by state law of Virginia, he was not allowed to free his own slaves. He could not free his own. George Washington could not free his own slaves. And then after the Revolution, they shortly passed a law that says, well, you can free them on your death. So Washington freed him on his death. And then after Washington did, they said that was a mistake. We should have never passed that law. And they repealed that law. So Jefferson could not free his slaves even on his death. So these 2 guys are 2 of the loudest anti-slavery guys in the country. And they both owned slaves. But people don't understand how that worked. But Washington is the guy who signed the first anti-slavery federal law we had in America, and he signed actually 3 federal anti-slavery. He couldn't get his own state to go with it, but he got the feds to go with it. And then Thomas Jefferson, he's the first. He signed the very first law in the history of the world to ban the African slave trade. Was Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner? He hated slavery, but he couldn't free his own slaves by the law. So that's not an excuse for anything, but that's just saying that's historical reality. But these guys were anti-slavery leaders. Wow. And so you go through and you start looking at the Benjamin Franklins, who, along with Benjamin Rush, founded the first anti-slavery society, or John Jay, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who founded the New York Anti-Slavery Society. Just go through all the founding fathers. These guys aren't who we think they are, because we don't even know our own history anymore. Which is why we have these 2 world-class museums in Texas that people can come see. You can and we let people actually handle a lot of stuff.
Tell them how they find it.
Go. There's 2 ways. WallBuilders.com, And that's the museum over in the Fort Worth area that has the documents, the books, the Bibles. And then the other museum is called the American Journey Experience, and that's where you can see the really cool artifacts. I mean, Lincoln's bloodstained jacket from when he got shot and assassinated. No, oh yeah. So part of it is at the National Park Service, but we have collar and sleeves. We have the shirt cuff. We have it's so much related to that. We actually have the key to the box where Lincoln was shot there at Ford's Theater. We have Lincoln's Bible. We have so many of those cool things.
Homeschoolers come through.
Homeschoolers come through. Public schoolers, parents, grandparents, everybody. And there's something for everybody because again, you'll see the Bible landed on the moon. You'll see the chalice for communion, all that cool stuff that you don't see in your history books anymore. And by the way, this is the other thing. Prior to World War II, you will find this stuff in your history books. So it's not like it's being made up. It's just that we haven't heard it in 60 years. And that's the biggest problem we have is we don't know who we are as a people.
Right. When you're in front of crowds of people, Christian, non-Christian alike, what's the big takeaways you want them to get from all this life research? I mean, your life message.
What I want them to do is have a hunger for truth, because you should never believe me, ever. Now, I love the Bereans, Acts 17:11. Paul said, "These guys, I love them because they won't believe anything I tell them because they check it out."
You're like, let me go check that out.
Go check it out.
We'll meet tomorrow.
And that's the other thing that's fun about calling me a pseudo-historian. We saw an academic book came out recently, and the two professors were boasting they had 200 footnotes in that book. I don't think I've ever written a book with less than 1,500 footnotes, and they aren't quoting other professors. They quote the actual document and send you back to the actual. Because we want people to prove us wrong. Well, they can't, and that's why they just use titles and names. You know, Jesus, he's a wine bibber and a glutton. Oh, he hangs with those Samaritans. You know, it's all the bias stuff, not based in truth. So what we want people to do is have a hunger for truth, have a hunger. We want them to realize there's a lot more than they think there is out there about everything. And you need to dig deep.
And just because it's not on Google or Wikipedia.
That's right. And even if it is, it's the logarithms have been changed, like with me.
Yeah.
If you look me up, all the 10 out of the 10 top articles are going to be negative, despite the fact that we have millions of pieces out there. They're positive. I have literally thousands of recorded messages out there. Nobody ever goes and listens to them. They just see what Wikipedia says. And so Wikipedia will always be the top entry. And they do that through logarithms. Yeah. But we teach people that you should believe nothing, question everything, do what the Bereans did, search and see what's true, and then embrace truth. There's a powerful passage, 2 Thessalonians 1:10 through 12, where he says, if you don't have a love for the truth, God will send a delusion. Yes. And then you'll believe a lie and be damned.
That's right.
And you may be a genuinely sincere person. But if you believe a lie, it will bring a spirit of delusion. Yep. And you will pay the consequences even if you're a good person. Yep. And so for us, the number one thing is always ask what the truth is and dig it out and find it. You hear a sermon, say, that's really good. I'm going to check the scriptures and see if they were all used in the right context.
That's right. Not pulled out.
Whatever it is, you just always want to go back for truth. So if we can be truth lovers, and Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. The more you love truth, the more you'll love Jesus, quite frankly. It's real simple.
You know, on this, Jesus said, why do you hate my message and hate me so much? He says, because you're your father. Because if, they got mad. Actually, Abraham believed in me and spoke of me. And that's the father of lies. And Jesus warns us in the last days that there'll be such great deception that even the elect, if possible, would be deceived.
That's right.
You and I have watched deception grow. It's unbelievable in the last 30 years of being a minister, 35 years I've been in full-time ministry, just to see, and to your point about the algorithms, where we get information from, any insight on, I'm a parent, listen to this, or I'm just a lover of Jesus, and I'm like, my sources potentially are skewed. The Bible, obviously.
And you always go to original sources. Don't go to somebody's opinion. Think about if you're in a court trial, they only let eyewitnesses testify.
That's so good.
They don't let people who read about it in the newspaper testify.
Right.
And they don't let people who studied it testify. You have to be a first-hand eyewitness. Yeah. And that's the way the court does. And why? Because they want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
That's right.
And so it doesn't matter what your friend said about the accident or what your friend said about the incident. It doesn't matter what you read in the paper about it. What did you see? Yeah. And that That is the basis. Now, the other thing I'll throw out is, be careful how I say this. In the 4 centuries of America and American education, in the last century, we changed the pedagogy of education. That is the teaching methods.
Okay.
So
Explain that.
Progressives got a hold of education in the early 1900s, and by the 1910s, they'd instituted 5 major philosophical changes in the way that we teach. For example, we have age-graded education. If you're 14, you're in the 7th grade, whatever it is.
Whatever.
What a stupid thing. I know 14-year-olds that are more mature than 55-year-olds.
Yeah.
We used to group you based on what you knew.
Yeah.
And based on what you knew, you might go through 3 grades in 1 year, or it might take you 3 years for one
And
grade.
to your point, they're calling Elon Musk crazy because he's like, I'm not going to limit my children.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And see, that's the progressive thing where everybody has to fit in a box. We don't treat you as an individual. We treat you as part of a group. And so we show the herd. It's the herd. And that's the thing about progressives is you're not individuals, you're groups. And that's why they get fixated on race or gender or sex or whatever.
I remember when the doctor told us we didn't want, they were doing all these child vaccinations for our children. We're like, we don't think. He goes, we vaccinate for the herd.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, well, my kid's not.
They're not a herd.
They're an
my
individual.
Kids are individuals. That's exactly.
That's right.
And so that's what happened. So what happened before then, this is where it's really interesting, because in the 1910s, they said, look, we've got assembly lines, we got mass production, Henry Ford.
Right. Look how successful.
They specifically said, we don't need people who think, we need people who take instructions.
Wow.
And that's where they made the changes. So what did we do for 3 centuries before that? We taught kids to think, not to learn.
How to find information.
We've made them learners. They're lifelong learners. No, they used to be thinkers.
Yeah.
A thinker can feed himself. A learner has to have someone else feed them.
That's right.
And so when you
we see that in our churches.
We see that in our churches because we're not the Bereans. And Pastor said this, but I never looked it up to see if he was telling me the truth, the context. So we don't question. And going back to that thinking, if you look at the scriptures, Jesus asked 337 questions in the scriptures. He never answered most of them.
Wow, well said.
So what he's always doing is, where did you get that? Where'd that come from? Who said that?
What say you?
Yeah, exactly. It's always, and see, that is the Jewish educational model, is asking questions. And they called that forensics or catechisms. Catechisms are asking questions.
Yeah.
And when we changed in the 1920s, that's the first time in American history we ever did fill in the blank, true, false, or multiple choice, because it's all about, what have you learned? Did I, the teacher, tell you A, B, C, or D? Did I, the teacher, tell you this, true or false? See, everything is now, we're fed. We don't feed ourselves anymore. And so one of the coolest documents we have, and nobody may think it's cool except me, and this is how nerdy I can be, but I have a document from John Quincy Adams that's 4 pages long. He's 18 years old. He's a senior at Harvard, and he's about to engage in a 2-hour debate the next night. He writes his paper on Tuesday night. Wednesday night, he's having a 2-hour debate, and he's having a 2-hour debate with William Cranch. And so he writes this letter, and he's just basically trash-talking William Cranch. He said, look, we should get an hour tomorrow night, and I am so going to mop you when you're going to be – and he just – it's really funny because they're very good friends, but he's just trash-talking him. Here's the deal. Do you know what the debate was over? Each of them got 1 hour on the debate. If you take a stalk of asparagus.
No. Are you?
If you take a stalk of asparagus, it's green on one end, it's white on the other. Did God intend you to eat the green end first or the white end first? And John Quincy Adams, he has to take the position.
Peel the banana this way.
John Quincy Adams takes the position, I have to, for an hour, prove to you that God wants you to eat the white end first, and you for an hour have to prove to me that God...
And I'm going to mock you up. I'm going to tear you.
But see, the point is, I have to pick out the weaknesses in your thought. I have to pick out the ways to rebut it, and it's all about thinking. It's not about asparagus.
No.
Who
cares about asparagus? Yeah.
But we have a list of those topics, and they take the most absurd talking, but it's to make you think.
That's so good.
And see, we don't think about the news we hear. I wonder... Is that report accurate? I wonder if there's a bias there. I wonder, we don't ask those questions
even
anymore.
For our own side.
Even for our own side. And I question my own side
all the
time. I question everybody because of what I've learned in history and what I've learned in the Bible.
Right.
Jesus questioned his disciples. He questioned the Pharisees. He questions his friends. He questions his enemies. Yep. And that's what we have to get back. We have to be self-feeders. We can't
the Reformation was about him. The 99 Thesis was, let me question some things.
That's right.
He wasn't trying to destroy the Catholic Church.
That's
He was
right.
like, let's
Just
question.
raising.
That's how we do life.
That's what thinkers do.
That's what they do.
That's what thinkers do, and
Yeah.
we're learners today.
Yeah.
We got to
That's
stop
right.
being learners. We got to start being thinkers.
That's so good. Hey, this has been unbelievable today. So WallBuilders.com.
WallBuilders.com.
Okay, and again, where are the two museums at?
American Journey Experience. Go online, American Journey Experience, or go to WallBuilders.com. Both museums, but also WallBuilders.com will have a ton of historical resources.
And then what about your video teachings? And
we have all the social media stuff. We got
Okay.
Instagrams. We got YouTube channels. We've got everything out there, all the normal stuff, and then all over YouTube. I'll speak 6, 8, 10 churches a week, and all that usually is put up by the churches on their YouTube.
Yeah.
So it's out there.
There you go. Would you take the few seconds that we have left and pray over anyone engaging with us today that they would become life questioners, thinkers, and that we can break this thing of deception?
Yeah, Father, I pray that you would actually, I don't mean this in a bad way, but give us a spirit of doubt where we stop and say, wait a minute, where'd you get that? Help us to back off and start asking questions. Help us to start thinking. Help us not to be a receiver of everything that we hear, no matter whether it comes from a friend or an enemy, no matter whether it comes from good guys or bad guys. Let us question everything, Father. Let us have a love for the truth that we're willing to dig till we find the truth. Let it not be convenient love. Let it not be a love that's easy, but help us to develop the habit of pursuing the truth. Help us to be the Bereans, that we're going to check this out. We're going to go back and look at all the sources that we can find and make sure this. Help us to be grounded in truth. Help us to have a love for the truth. Help us to have a spirit of truth, Father. And we know that you are truth, and we know that as we pursue truth, we'll come closer to you in doing this. But give us that doubting, inquiring mind that says, wait a minute, I need to find out before I go any further with this. Help us to do that, Father, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. Well, you heard it here. Dr. David Barton, WallBuilders. Check out all his information. I think it'll bless you.